Thank you. Good afternoon, and good day to you. Worried about a bit of the smoke that's in the atmosphere, but hopefully that starts to clear and our weather starts to mitigate over the next few days. I wanted to start today by announcing that as of today, the specific information on the 10% cuts are now available online. I want to say, and we'll go through that a little bit today, this has been a very difficult set of circumstances, and the reason it has taken some time is because it is important that we're mindful and thoughtful in how we make these cuts, and I'll outline a few of them at a high level. We have Kevin Hibbard here from the budget department to talk a bit about the specifics if you have some questions. I think if you look at those, you will see that the specifics on those cuts are going to be devastating, but as governor, I am constitutionally required to balance the budget, and they are necessary. We also will talk a bit about energy, COVID-19 update, and I want to say that Dr. Harris is here as well if you have some questions. But let me say that the cuts that we've outlined today, we've been working on for over 2 months, 3 months almost, and they're very difficult cuts to announce. They amount to phase 2. Phase 1, of course, was when we halted all new hires and all new major contracts. Phase 2 is the first 10% cuts. Phase 3 will be an additional 10% cut. And then, as I've said before and repeat over and over again, phase 3, because if you remember, we lost a third of our income. 10 and 10 is 20. That's not 30%. That third 10% is going to come with the work of the legislature, which is going to need to say, what are the things that we have asked you to do that we no longer think you can do? But they are difficult nonetheless, and they will impact Wyoming residents, absolutely all Wyoming residents in some way. They will be felt by our communities, by our citizens, by our businesses, and not just those who work in government. The cuts total more than $250 million, with 5 agencies making up 2/3 of the state's general fund budget. Those are the largest agencies, so they take the bulk of the cuts. Look into detail, you'll see other agencies and how they've been affected. But for today, the Department of Health will take almost $90 million in cuts. The University of Wyoming will take $42 million in cuts. Community colleges will take $25.7 million in cuts. The Department of Corrections will take $23 million in cuts, and the Department of Family Services will take $11.9 million in cuts. I'm going to talk a little bit about what they mean and what I mean by saying that they will be devastating. For the Department of Health, these cuts mean direct impact for services to low-income residents, seniors, and those with developmental disabilities. It means that programs that assist seniors with at-home care will no longer be funded, nor will vaccination programs for some children. It means we'll be reducing funding to early childhood developmental and educational programs. And these are just a few examples. Each of these is an agonizing choice, and let you be rest assured that none of these has come easy, nor are these being put out as some sort of political statement. These are the cuts that we've had to make, and there are more coming. Each is agonizing, but I have to say it's taken a long time to review them and we just don't see any other options. 90% of the Department of Health's budget goes to communities of Wyoming and to those who provide care for our people. So we cannot make $90 million in cuts without reducing services. The Department of Corrections cuts will impact those who are released from confinement to re-enter Wyoming communities. There are going to be reductions in funding to programs that help keep these individuals out of prison and keep communities safe. Again, not easy and not ones I like. Parole agents will be required to supervise more offenders. That's again devastating. But it is necessary because 1/3 of our revenue is gone, and even with these cuts, we must either spend our way out of savings or cut deeper in the next step. We have already seen the impact on budget cuts on our community colleges with the elimination of athletic programs at Sheridan and Gillette colleges and the ensuing challenge that those colleges face as people recognize that these cuts are coming and are trying to figure out ways that they can address them. We've seen what that means for academic programs in other schools. One of the community college programs that's particularly poignant to me that is being eliminated is the Wyoming Works program. You may remember that was my program that I put forward when I was inaugurated. That workforce development program was designed to help adult students learn a skill that leads to secure employment. But we can't afford it. So I'm sacrificing a program that I believe deeply in. University of Wyoming is going to face some very difficult decisions in their budget, including a hard look at many of their programs. Some may ask, why not just cut staff? I've already talked about that. You can eliminate the entirety of Wyoming staff, all of the state staff, and we haven't fixed this problem. While positions are being reduced in agencies around the state, in the Department of Health's case, only 14% of its budget goes to staffing and administrative costs. The vast majority of those staff work at facilities like the state hospital and the Life Resource Center. And if you've seen the noble clients of the Life Resource Center, you know how challenging it is to make sure that we give quality lives to these people. 86% of the health department's general fund budget goes out to local businesses, community organizations, or providers in the form of payments or reimbursements. For cost reductions of this magnitude, we cannot avoid making painful cuts to programs. And the number of state employees is down already. I've mentioned that over the last decade, it has shrunk substantially. 10% fewer people working in the state today than 10 years ago. So again, I am saddened that we have to make these cuts. I know people from across the state will be greatly impacted, and I know they will be calling. But Wyoming is facing over $1 billion shortfall. That's 1/3 of our income. And if your business or paycheck was cut by 1/3, and maybe it has been during these global economic times. Yesterday I heard from a woman in the western part of the state who told me for a substantial period of time about the hardships that she and her family have endured as a result of COVID. And I've also heard from people from Sheridan with a very different point of view, also vastly affected. But they both have different points of view about how it should be rectified. What I know is that this state and I am going to have to make hard and necessary choices. One sector that has not been talked about is K-12 education. There is a $500 million shortfall in funding for education. After review of all of our options to address this shortfall, we found that the governor's statutory authority for educational funding is separate and different from my authority to manage funding in the executive branch. It is just not as clear what my duties there are. But given this ambiguity, I believe the best approach, and the one that I'm taking today, is to reach out and ask school districts to voluntarily join with the rest of state government and start to look at how they can implement 10% cuts. This is where local control comes in. They know best where to make those cuts. And maybe some of those districts have already done that. And I say that with all due respect. I served as a school board member, and I know and I believe that education is absolutely vital to the success of our state. These budget cuts are impactful and painful. I believe they are part of a vicious cycle as opposed to a virtuous cycle. The vicious cycle is when one bit of bad news creates another bit of bad news, which creates another bit of bad news. As we get dollars that are going to be taken away from community services, those are dollars that are not going to those communities. Those are dollars that aren't going to be spent in the stores. Those are dollars that aren't going to be in local tax bases. This is going to be more and more problematic. Traditionally, we've relied upon our core industries in energy and mining sectors to pay our bills. Roughly 10 times what we pay in taxes we get back in services that are paid for by the mineral industry. The ability of those industries to continue to carry that bill has been compromised. There's just no question about that. In March, we had 27 rigs running. Today, we have 1 and possibly 2 rigs running. Price of oil has collapsed. It is now recovering a little bit to almost a break even for Wyoming, but that's certainly not as profitable as what we had hoped. We all know the challenges that our coal industry faces, and I will guarantee you that we are doing everything that we possibly can. Everything from suing for port access to speaking to Attorney General Barr just a week ago about the challenge of a joint venture between Peabody and Arch Minerals to keep our vital coal industry going, to talking with Administrator Wheeler and the EPA to see if there are ways that we can alleviate the burdens on our industries to make them more competitive and to bring those vital jobs back. According to research published this week, though, nationally, the coal, oil, and natural gas industries have lost about 118,000 jobs between March and July. Of these industries, oil was hit the hardest, losing 17% of its workforce since March. And if you've driven, as I have, from Gillette to Douglas and see all the rigs that are parked on the side of the road, you will know just how frustrating it is to see that industry on its back. It is not likely that this trend will turn around rapidly and possibly not as significantly as we would like. So we have to take these measures. These are vital industries to Wyoming, and few states have felt the impact more than Wyoming. Because Wyoming is the nation's leader in coal production, we have more coal workers affected than other states. No matter how you look at the numbers, it's been bad news. I want to speak about what we're doing to assist these workers, to help them survive in these industries until market conditions improve. And I do believe that they will improve, just not right away. To assist workers in finding work, I directed the Department of Environmental Quality and the Wyoming Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to increase funding for reclamation and cleanup efforts. These measures will provide jobs, hopefully, to those workers who have been let go. And I'm pleased to report the following. Currently, 968 orphan wells are under contract for plugging and cleanup. An additional nearly 600 wells will be under contract within the next month. And that means over 1,500 wells will soon be under contract to be plugged and abandoned. In addition, cleanup of approximately 40 coal bed methane pits should be contracted and ready to go by fall and into 2021. I've also received the recommendation of a good friend in Casper who's recommended that Wyoming perhaps look at converting our fleet of vehicles to natural gas. There is a substantial capital cost to that, but Ked, I want to thank you for that recommendation, and we're certainly looking into it. In 2019, we only plugged about 670 wells. The DEQ, through their abandoned mine lands program, uses AML funds to contract for reclamation of old coal mine sites every year. This year, we are spending more money on more projects with an economic benefit projected to total more than $200 million. And there are other positive signs. This week, we heard Wyoming's unemployment rate declined yet again. More people are going back to work, and our state has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. Couple that with the fact that we have one of the lowest infection rates in the country, and you have a good recipe. It seems like we're doing the right things. For those struggling to find work, Wyoming has applied to the President's Lost Wages Assistance Program to bring in additional money for those who remain unemployed. And just this week, WCDA announced rule changes for evictions to make sure that that was more accessible as well. We've put out more than $300 million to small businesses, and those checks are arriving now and offering support. We've held back a portion of the CARES money to help with agriculture, and I'm happy to say that just this last week, Superior Livestock conducted an auction on Thursday of that event, which was mostly Wyoming and Montana cattle, seemed to be one of the best sales of this summer. This is a challenging time, but I do believe that there are reasons for optimism, and I do think that there are brighter days ahead due to the sacrifices we are making. You know, like wearing masks or staying socially distanced. More and more you see people that are aware of those things around the state, and we're starting to make the right progress. Those are having positive effects, and those positive effects will ripple into our economy. And I want to thank Wyoming for all that you have done so far. It is really a hard thing today to stand here before you and talk about the challenges that we are facing with this budget. Now, I know that these 10% cuts are going to cause an enormous amount of conversation. They should. This is our state, and what we want to see this state do and be able to do are things that we all need to talk about, things that our legislature is going to have to discuss. But keep in mind, this is the first 10%, and we have 20% more to go. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. And just today I was talking with a gentleman from a town that has a rest area in it, and he was talking about the challenge of having closed that rest area and the fact that people aren't coming in off the interstate the way they used to. And could we just please reopen it? We looked carefully at what those costs were going to be. We looked carefully at the ways that we could do the least impact and the most benefit to our communities. None of these choices doesn't come or comes without a cost. And so it is important that we continue this discussion. And I am willing, and I think anyone who has talked to me over the last little bit knows that I'm willing to take any of those comments. We're in this together. So let me just finish off a little bit, provide some short COVID-19 update. As of today, there have been 3,135 lab-confirmed cases with an additional 549 probable cases. There are currently 2,562 recoveries among our lab-confirmed cases, and that leaves us with about 536 active lab-confirmed cases. That is an increase in the number of active cases up from 2 weeks ago. It's bouncing around a bit. Today, we heard that we had 46 new lab-confirmed cases. We saw an increase in deaths this last week. However, and I think this is important, and we're going to work on trying to make sure we list this appropriately. Some of those deaths were listed as Wyoming residents when they actually acquired the virus and died out of state. Our official count is now 37 deaths. Our statewide COVID-19 dashboard has not changed, with categories of new cases and new hospitalizations continuing to be listed as concerning. We have 18 hospitalizations reported by our hospitals today, a number that has ranged from 15 to 20 over the last week. What I worry about as you look at that graph is that you see it is ticking back up again, and that is a cause for concern. As I've said before, it's not just COVID-19. It's people that might have had a car accident or broken a leg or strangulated hernia or something that might need hospitalization, and we need to make sure that we still have capacity. But our statewide numbers have continued to show some stability this month, and the percentage of tests that have come back positive for COVID-19 over the past 14 days has declined to 2.45%, and that's positive news. We have seen a slight increase in the average number of lab-confirmed cases of COVID-19 per day in the past 2 weeks. We went from an average of 27 cases per day in early August to 35 new cases per day over the past 14 days. Carbon County is now the county with the most active cases in the state, with an outbreak at the state penitentiary representing most of the recent cases. We continue to see scattered cases throughout Wyoming communities, as well as scattered small outbreaks occurring elsewhere. Indoor social gatherings continue to be a factor in driving these new cases. But I'm glad to report that we've had a substantial interest from school districts in our surveillance testing program for teachers and staff, and the Department of Health is continuing to work with school districts on finalizing the details of that program. And I'm also encouraged by the fact that schools are going back. We're seeing schools on the local basis have been able to move forward. I am sure that there'll be some bumps along the way, but I am very, very happy that we are again going back to school. Lastly, I want to extend a public thank you to President Trump, who graciously invited me to come to his acceptance speech tomorrow. But for the people of Wyoming, I want you to know my job is here, and tomorrow we are taking the whole day to talk about SLIB meeting to make sure that we can support our towns and counties and our hospitals with the COVID money and the process that we've laid out. We'll be talking about making sure that our allocation models meet with the needs of the state of Wyoming and meet with the community needs. So with that, as I say, we have Kevin here, Kevin Hibbard from Budget, and we have Dr. Harris here as well, and willing to take some questions. And I think Tom, do you have a question? Or? Hi, Tom, thanks. I'll repeat it, yeah.
So I wasn't able to look at the details of the cuts before cutting in, but I wasn't sure if this first 10% includes positional eliminations as well, and if so, how many? Could you sort of discuss that?
Yeah, Tom, thank you for that. The question was, in this first 10%, are there some position eliminations? And there are. Kevin, do you want to speak to some of those in the detail?
Thank you, Governor. I'm Kevin Hibbard. I'm the Director of the Budget Department. And to date, on this step 2, we have 274 positions that we reduced enterprise-wide as a combination of full-time positions, part-time, and AWACS. Mostly they're full-time positions.
Thanks, Tom. Do we have a question on the phones?
Governor, this is Bob Beck at Wyoming Public Radio.
Yes.
I had a question. So we watched the Revenue Committee not really deal with any taxes this week, and you're making budget cuts. Is there a point where you need to get involved more and see what we can do about revenue?
Thank you, Bob. I have been talking with the legislature, and I do think that to be responsible, we're going to have a discussion about revenues, ways that we can change revenues. As you know, I started out those conversations by saying, first, let's look at the exemptions we have in place. I continue to work with the Revenue Committee. I don't think it's a big surprise that they didn't take any actions. I think that there still remains a couple of notions in the state. One is that we have all this money stuffed away in coffee cans, so clearly we can, afford to spend some from our savings. Things may come back. I think there's always that hope that they may come back. And we had an election in which a number of people who were successful came through with no new tax pledges. And so I don't see this as really a big surprise. But what I think part of it comes back to me to indicate that, sure, we can spend the entire rainy day account down over the next 2 years, and then what? One of the big challenges, and I speak about this with education funding, is that we're really on cruise control. It's backstopped by the LISRA, and so we're approaching this cliff, and we really don't have a way to affect a slowdown or a pause. We need to look at all of those things. I think the new legislators really need to have the opportunity to learn about the budget, and the people of Wyoming need to be assured that what they see in the budget documents, which we'll develop, is in fact exactly what the state has. It isn't hard to look at the revenue figures and say we're down a third and we need to balance our budget. What I think many Wyoming people may be thinking is we've got all this money. We've got our permanent funds. We've got the LISRA. We don't know what's different between the LISRA and the SIPA and all the other acronym funds that we have, and we need to get that down to a very simple approach so that people understand there just isn't that much money. And if this state is going to run over 5 years, we're going to have to build this budget not on a biennium basis, but on a 5-year basis, so that we know in 5 years' time that we still have a state that we can run.
Quickly follow up. One of the things we saw years ago when they raised the statewide sales taxes, we were basically out of money. Are you anticipating that's probably the point we're going to have to get to before taxes are seriously considered?
Bob, I hope that people in Wyoming recognize the circumstances as being severe well before that time, but I know there are several in the legislature who feel that that's got to happen before anybody looks at this. The state's done this a time or two before. I tried to build businesses at times during those really bleak years. I know I've talked with Governor Sullivan about those challenges, talked with Governor Geringer. It's sort of interesting. Each of these governors has faced those challenges, and I do think that people in Wyoming have got to be satisfied that we're out of money.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, Governor. Jim O'Reilly from Bigfoot 99 Radio. Thanks for taking my question.
Hi, Jim.
You touched on my question when you mentioned that Carbon County is leading the state in new virus cases. And before that, you were talking about wanting to list the deaths of Wyoming people who contract the virus and die out of state, listing those appropriately. There's a concern here in Carbon County that the deaths or that the virus cases with the prison, as you mentioned, are being listed inappropriately. The state's focus on new numbers combined with lumping the numbers from the prison, staff and inmate in with the cases in the general population does two things. It causes unnecessary alarm and concern within the county and the communities in the county because they don't know where it is, the way the state is reporting them now, combined with the Department of Corrections' slow release of that information. And we're also beginning to see some evidence from the outside that healthcare providers are concerned about coming in or visitation coming into the county because of headlines and reports that say we are leading the state in these cases. Does the state have an obligation, a duty, an ethical duty to report these cases appropriately so undue harm is not done to a county like Carbon?
So, Jim, I'm going to let Allie Harris respond to more specifics of your question. I do think the state has an obligation to ethically, I think that was the term you used, report its data. And I will say that I think the state is trying to do the very best job that it can. I heard, as I said, from a woman in the western part of the state who was suggesting that we were spinning data for purposes, and that is absolutely not true. I think from time to time people have different points of view. I have a legislator whose friend is sending me, this is what I think the state's webpage ought to look like. Other people have sent me, here's another webpage. We're trying to do the best that we can to accurately point out what cases are happening, where they're happening. The reason I brought up the cases that are now reported as Wyoming is to make people aware of that fact. We need to make sure that people are satisfied that they're getting the right data. And I think if you look at Wyoming compared to any other state in the union at this point, with the exception of places that have extreme lockdown orders, I think Wyoming is faring very well, and I don't think people need to be concerned about going to Carbon County or coming to Wyoming. I think Wyoming is doing a really good job. And yeah, can we refine our data? Can we make it better? We've done that all along the way and tried to explain that. But Dr. Harris, would you like to speak to particulars more?
Thank you, Governor. And I would just like to point out first that, certainly, interpreting cases within the state penitentiary differently than cases in the community is something that we do epidemiologically, but that there is certainly a connection between the state penitentiary and the community because there are staff that work in the state penitentiary and then live in the community. We do want to be as transparent as possible. Separating the state penitentiary out from the county cases, we'd certainly have to look at, what other situations in which we would separate cases in a specific situation out from the total county numbers. We do provide the cases in the state penitentiary to the county on a regular basis so that they can answer questions about that. And of course, Corrections does report those. And so we will continue to look for ways to make sure that we are being transparent and timely in reporting those data.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Governor Gordon, this is Camille Erickson at the Casper Star Tribune.
Yes, hi, Camille.
I had a quick question. Perhaps it's for Mr. Kevin Hibbard. However, I'm interested, the 274 positions that are being reduced in this phase of cuts, are those positions layoffs? These are people being laid off, or are they vacant positions?
Thank you. I think the most important thing I'd like to speak about that is when the governor initiated step one, which is the position freeze, that froze positions, and that allowed us to facilitate taking vacant positions and limiting the exposure for actually having to reduce or reductions of force or RIFs. So the bulk of these are currently vacant positions. However, there are RIFs, but I do not intend to go into those details.
And Camille, thanks for that question. The reductions
Absolutely.
in force, the RIFs, as you know, they're very sensitive, and we need to properly respect the individuals that may be subject to that. So thank you. Next question. Tom, did you have another? Oh.
So I was just curious about, you mentioned that there are likely more cuts coming regarding the phase 3. So I guess I was wondering if you have a deadline for when you might make an announcement regarding additional cuts, and kind of what your thinking is there.
Thank you, Tom, for that question. For those that might not have heard it, I think you probably did, but Tom was asking about the timeline for the next round of 10% cuts. Those are being worked on right now. Agencies have submitted a couple of preliminary thoughts on those, and we're going through the same process with those. We hope to have those available early fall, and making sure that they are properly addressed. And again, since we're really now talking about not only just muscle but bone and sinew, and one of the things that I failed to point out is that our capacity to issue permits in some of the agencies is being diminished because we're seeing reductions in force. We're seeing things like people leaving with lots of experience and new people coming on in different capacities or filling in behind. Kind of slows down the whole process. But yeah, we'll look at that early fall. Next question from the phone.
Hello, Governor Gordon. It's Barbara Ann calling from the Bighorn County newspapers.
Hi, Barbara Ann. How are you? I understand you have a new ranch owner up in Bighorn County.
Yes. Hey, my question is about the home services cut. One of the goals of that program is to keep seniors in their home as long as possible rather than going into the assisted living facility. And given that the assisted living facilities have been hard hit with cases of COVID-19, could not a case be made that that program is essential and CARES Funding Act money could be used to sustain it?
Thanks for that question, Barbara, and we are looking at that. As you know, in some of the allocation models that we've done, we're trying to make sure that we can get program funding out as far as we can get. I think that CARES funding runs out if Congress doesn't act, and just yesterday I was talking to Senator Enzi about the likelihood of Congress acting on this, as not to put words in his mouth, but he wasn't that encouraging about Congress's ability to act. If they don't, our ability to sustain that program much after December on CARES funding is very limited. And let me also say, Barbara Ann, that nobody wants to do this. Absolutely nobody wants to do this. The problem is that the major programs in health are substantial, and so this means that some of the programs that are kind of ancillary to what the Department of Health does really come in for a very hard look.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Next question. Well, I thank you again for joining me today. I'm sorry it's such sad news. I do hope that our state is leading the way as it is. We have more tourism numbers this year. We just had a very successful state fair. It actually, instead of losing about $19,000, it actually made money this year, substantial money, and was one of the great success stories, one of 3 state fairs to run in the country this year. I am not aware of any other state that was able to have its county fairs, and I'm thrilled to hear that there are still plans to try to carry some of these activities into the fall. I continue to work with Governor Ricketts and Governor Herbert to see if there is any way that we can, with the right protocols, look for some resumption of at least a little bit of an athletic season this year. We're just doing our best to make sure that Wyoming gets back on its feet. And it is, as I say, encouraging that we have a new rig going up in Jonah. We have reason to believe Converse County may be seeing another rig soon. And again, WTI has grown a bit. And so, you know, hopefully the next press conference won't be quite as sad. But thank you again for joining us today.